डॉक्टर बाबासाहेब आंबेडकर ओपन युनिव्हर्सिटी.
Namaskar. I, Dr. Reena Vaishnav, Assistant Professor at Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University. Today in this session, we are going to discuss definition, meaning and nature of literature. Today in this session, we are going to discuss the different definitions of literature and literary studies, nature of literature, elements of literature, impulses that create literature, literary approaches, and at the end, we are also going to discuss different literary genres. So, today in this session, we are going to discuss UNIT-1, Definition, Meaning and Nature of Literature, BLOCK-1, EMGM101. So, let's dive into our session. So, in this video session, we are going to discuss these are the elements: the definition of literature and literary studies, nature of literature, elements of literature, impulses that creates literature, how style of writing reflects the personality of an author, the role of language in literature. As I have mentioned in the introduction, we also going to discuss the various approaches to the study of literary works, and at the end we will discuss major literary genres. Right? So these are the objectives of this video session. The first objective is the definition of literature and literary studies, nature of literature, elements of literature, impulses that create literature, style of writing, the role of language, various approaches, and major literary genres. The first point is the definition of literature and literary studies. The word literature is derived from the Latin word litera, meaning writing form with letter of alphabet. What does it mean? It actually refers any kind of written and printed materials, such as material on medicine, material on manuals, circulars, as well as we can include in it pamphlet. Are also called literature in general sense. It actually refers to all kind of written and printed materials such as medicine, electronic items, manuals, circulars, pamphlets. We all can include it in literature. Literature proper is imaginative or creative writing of recognized artistic value. Artistic value. In this way, we can say that literature is a body of written works of three aspects: language, period, and culture. It contains written materials like poetry, fiction, essays, etc. These are creative works of imagination with creative use of language and deal with the universal interest right? So, literature proper is imaginative or creative writing of recognized artistic value. Literature is generally classified on the basis of nation, language, historical period, genre, and subject matter. The word literature is used in a very broad sense, which were recited, spoken or sung, right? So, in this way, this is not the exactly definitions of a literature. These are the ideas that which kinds of things or which kinds of written material we can say it is a literature. So, the first one is the word literature is derived from the Latin word litera, meaning writing form with the letter of alphabet. Literature proper is imaginative or creative writing of recognized artistic value, and literature is generally classified mainly on the basis of nation, language, historical period, genre and subject matter. Before the invention of writing, there are literary works which were recited, spoken, sung and mainly transmitted orally, right? Even in a present time, there are some societies where oral literary tradition exists, particularly among tribal and nomads. Tribal and nomads, right? They normally pass literature orally. Literature has always remained connected with oral performance. Even today, we can say that poetry is recited and play is performed, right? So, literature has always remained connected with oral performance. Oral performance. Even today, poetry is recited and play is performed on the stage. Poets and story writers read their works directly before the live audience. So, it means if you say any literary works is in oral form, also we can say it is a literature. Literature is the mirror of life. When I was in F.Y.B.A, there was one question, what is literature? And I was saying, and one of our teacher told me in a such way like, Reena, literature is the mirror of life. Literature is the reflection of society. So, these are some lines that already I keep in mind. Literature is the mirror of life. It grows out of life. Yet, it is not easy to define literature. Literature is composed of books. How you can say? Literature is composed of books. These books have a human interest. These books have a human interest, depend mainly two things. And what are the two things? The first, it is what the book says. What the book says. And the second is what it has to say. Can you identify the difference between two sentences? The books have human interest. Human interest mainly depend on two things. The first one is what the book says, and second, what it has to say. So all are the things, it is inculcated into what is literature. However, let's have a look at some definitions from reliable sources. Matthew Arnold says that literature is the artistic representation of the best that is known and thought in the world. Great men and women produce great thoughts and ideas, right? When these thoughts are written, it becomes literature, right? Another time I repeat it. Great men and women produce great thoughts. When these thoughts are written, they become literature. These thoughts give us a delight and instruction. These thoughts give us a delights as well as, you can say, artistic pleasure, aesthetic pleasure, as well as information, or you can say instructions, right? So great men and women produce great thoughts and ideas. When these thoughts are written, they become literature. These thoughts gives us delight and instructions, or you can say informations. The definition by Arnold applies to literature in general. Matthew Arnold, in his work Study of Poetry, defined poetry as criticism of life. Matthew Arnold defined his poetry as criticism of life. Criticism of life under the conditions fixed of such criticism by the laws of poetic truth and beauty. Now, let's see what Hudson says. Man sees and experiences things in life, right? Hudson says about literature. What is literature? So Hudson says that literature is the expression of life. According to Hudson, literature is the expression of life. So man sees and experiences things in life. They think and feel about life. Literature, it is mainly a vital record of these things. Literature is the expression of life. It depicts life in a beautiful and artistic way. So Hudson, in a normal way, he says that man think and feel about life, and the vital record of this thing, it is called literature. Now, next is Robert Louis Stevenson. What does he say? The difficulty of literature is not to write, but to write what you mean. Anyone can write a literature, anyone can write anything, but it does not mean everything we can include it in a literature. The difficulty of literature, the good or great literature, is not to write, but what you feel, what you wanted to convey to the reader. That is the main important thing. So, what to write, what you mean, and exactly the reader understand the thing the same as writer wants to say it, right? So, Robert Louis Stevenson says that what is literature? So, the difficulty of literature according to him is not to write, but to write what you mean. C.S. Lewis says, literature adds to reality. Literature does not simply describe only reality, but it enriches the necessary competences and daily life requires and provides. Right? So, C.S. Lewis says that literature adds to reality. It does not simply in literature, it does not mean that only reality describes these are the life, these are the difficulties that we have to live with it. Not only that, but it enriches the necessary competency that daily life requires and provides, and in this respect, it irrigates the desert that our life has already become. Oscar Wilde says, literature always anticipates life. Literature always anticipates life. It means it does not copy, but it molds it to its purpose. It does not copy, but it molds to its purpose, what exactly it wants to convey. Right? The next writer, Somerset Maugham, called poetry is the crown of literature. Goethe glorifies literature by saying that the decline of literature indicates the decline of nation. Any nation is famous mainly just because of the quality of a literature, right? So, Goethe glorifies literature by saying that decline of literature indicates the decline of a nation. Rebecca West says literature must be an analysis of experience. So, literature definition is the desire of a people to convey their knowledge, experience, and vision through written text, right? So, literature, what does it mean? So, literature convey their knowledge, experience and vision through their written material, written text. So, it can be concluded that literature is a storehouse of human knowledge. Literature is a storehouse of human knowledge in a printed and accessible form. Now, in our next slide, we are going to discuss vital characteristics of literature mainly based on various definitions. So, what are the characteristics of literature? So, you can see on the screen that the first characteristic is informative, second one is aesthetic pleasure, the language of literature is emotive, metaphorical and symbolic language, fictionality, literature has no pragmatic function, and literature has profound human significance. So, all these characteristics we are going to discuss one by one. So, the first one is informative. What does it mean, informative? Literature is usually mainly what it is? It is a mainly written material, right? Literature is mainly a written material which may include informations. Information, it can be anything like you can say science, history, biography, anything. Literature proper is mainly judged on aesthetic ground, aesthetic pleasure. It is the main purpose of real literature that it has to give aesthetic pleasure to the readers. The purpose of literature is to provide aesthetic pleasure following the norms of literary truth and beauty. Literature employs metaphorical and symbolic language which defamiliarizes the world, describes the literary works. And the language of literature is emotive. Emotive, it means emotions, which expresses emotions and arouses feelings, right? So, these are the main 4 characteristics. Literature, it should be informative, it gives aesthetic pleasure. The language, it should be emotive and metaphorical and symbolic language. Another characteristics of literature is fictionality. What does it mean? Fictionality is one of the most important characteristics of literary text. Literature is the product of the mainly writer's imagination. It is mainly a product of writer's imagination. What it is? Imagination, it means fiction. Literature is the product of the writer's imagination. Even historical figures created by literary writers are fictitious, not real. Literature has no pragmatic function. What does it mean? Pragmatic means? Pragmatic, it means dealing with problems in a practical way. Dealing with the problems in a practical way rather than following ideas and principles, right? So, literature has no pragmatic function. Literature has profound human significance. As it grows out of life, when we read great books, we come to closer to life and understand life in a better way. By reading literature, you can understand life, humans in a better way. So, these are the another 3 characteristics of literature. Fictionality, literature has no pragmatic function and has a profound human significance. Now, in next slide, we are going to discuss nature of literature. In a simple sense, when you say like nature of literature, the language of science is denotative. What does it mean, denotative? Denotative, it means it carries thought. While the language of literature carries emotions as well as thought. right? So the language of science is denotative. It carries mainly a thought, while the language of literature, it gives you a information, but it carries both first emotions and second informations, or you can say thoughts. Understanding nature of literature helps us differentiate between what is literature from what is not literature. The question can be solved distinguishes the use of language, the way you use your language. Language is the raw material of literature, like stone or metal for sculpture. Literary language is expressive and it conveys the tone and attitude of the writer. Right? Through the language, you can identify what exactly writer wants to say. Right? The words are the same, but the way the writer explained it, described it, so it changes its meaning. Literary language is expressive and it conveys the tone and attitude of the writer. It does not merely state or communicate, but persuade the readers. In literature, we can say I is functional, right? I is a functional, not real. Time and place in novels are not real, but imaginary. If in any novels, if you say these are the place, so this time or a place, what writer described in any work, so they are imaginary. They are not real. If we expect functionality and imagination as inevitable traits of literature, a literary work is highly complex organization. That is the reason why literary and non-literary works often overlap. Literature provides an objective platform for knowledge and understanding. It gives information as well as understanding. Literature connects us with a broader cultural world and makes us better human being. According to me, this is the main function of literature, to make us a better human beings. Now, in the next slide, we are going to discuss literature of knowledge and literature of power. What is the main function of this thing? Here I have written Thomas De Quincey, a famous English essayist. Thomas De Quincey, who is an essayist, in 19th century laid down the distinction between, he has given two distinction, literature of knowledge and literature of power. On which basis he has divided these two parts, literature of knowledge and literature of power. So, let's see the function of it. According to him, the function of the literature of knowledge is to teach. The literature of knowledge is to teach, and the literature of power, what is the function of the literature of power, is to move. What does it mean, move? Move, it means to persuade. Right? So, according to Thomas De Quincey, he has laid down distinction between literature of knowledge and literature of power. According to Thomas De Quincey, the main function of literature of knowledge is to teach, and the main function of literature of power is to move. While the object of the second, the first one is to inform, to prove, right? To teach, it means it gives the information, and to move, it means it appeals to higher understanding of reason, and mainly it gives you a aesthetic pleasure. the main function, another main function of literature is to give aesthetic pleasure to the readers. Literature of power belongs to the domain of mainly a poetry, because poetry mainly gives you aesthetic pleasure. No logic can be applied to them as they are governed by their own laws. Now in the next slides we are going to discuss important elements of literature. So what are the important elements of literature? The first one is intellectual element, emotional element. Third one is element of imagination. Fourth one is technical element. Right? So now one by one we are going to discuss briefly what is intellectual element. So intellectual elements, it mainly refers to the author's view about subject. Author's view about subject. Right? Next, emotional element. What does it mean? It describes the emotional feelings. Mainly, it describes emotional feelings. The third element it is about element of imagination. You can say imagination, it means creativity, creative idea. And the last one is technical element. Technical elements, it is a composition of a style. Composition of style. So the first important element of literature is intellectual element. Intellectual element, this is the element of thought. It is mainly an author's views about the subjects. Right? This is an element of thought which the writer expresses in his work, and in many famous works of literature, thought and the writer's idea, it is mainly predominate. Right? The second one is emotional element. Literature is often the result of emotional upsurge. You have already listened like purgation of emotions. Poetry is purgation of emotions. Catharsis, that is the one word. Catharsis, what does it mean? Purgation of emotions. So, emotional element. Literature is often the result of emotional upsurge. Upsurge, it means a sudden increase of something, emotional, purgation of emotions. There is a one word, you can find out the meaning of it, catharsis. Catharsis, what does it mean? Purgations of emotions at certain levels, and the writer tries to describe that emotions into his or her works. And romantic poetry, that are spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. We know this line, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, means whenever we have a kind of emotions in our heart and that writer just write it into a paper and it becomes a poetry. So, it is called a emotional element. Elements of imagination. Literature is not real or factual, but it is mainly imaginative. It is creative. Imagination is a strong source of creative literature. Creative writers are stirred by intense vision, and they also arouse similar vision into the minds of the readers. Right? So, what kind of imaginative ideas in writer's mind he tries that his or her readers also experience such kinds of imagination. Technical element. Technical elements is related mainly to craftsmanship. It is mainly based on craftsmanship, right? An organization of thought, feelings and imagination. This elements is connected with mainly style, language, meter. So these are the technical element of literature. In technical element, you can include style, language, meter, figures of speech, right? So these are the technical elements of literature. So we have discussed mainly 4 important elements of literature. First one is intellectual element, emotional element, third one is element of imagination, and the last one is technical element. Now, in next slide, we are going to discuss impulses behind literature. First of all, what does it mean, impulses? Impulses means a sudden desire to do something. Sudden desire. Desire, it means ichha. Desire to do something. Right? So, impulses behind literature. What does it mean, impulses? Sudden desire to do something. Why does a writer write? Why any poet wants to write his or her poetry? What are the impulses that give birth to literature? So, one writer, Hudson, feels that there are definite impulses behind literature. He has put these impulses into mainly 4 groups. The first group is the desire for self-expression. If any writer wants to express his self, he uses literature. The interest in people and their doing, the interest in a real world. If any writer wants to describe the world in real manner, as well as the world of imagination and the love of form as a form. So these are the mainly impulses behind literature. All human beings, the first we are going to discuss the self-expression. What exactly it is? So all human beings have a desire to express themselves. The desire for self-expression is one of the impulses behind literature. People are always interested in the lives of other people, right? This impulse that creates novel, short stories and biographies. Human beings are mainly interested in people, as well as they also believe in a real world, in a world of reality, as well as the world of imagination. The world of reality, you can say the world of reality is dry and dull, but the world of imagination, it is full of pleasure. It is full of pleasurable. At the end, we are all interested in appearance as a form. This desire for form also creates literary genres, techniques, styles, diction and literary devices. So, impulses behind literature. It means impulses behind literature. It means there are the mainly 4 groups. The desire for self-expression. So, any writers wanted to express himself, he used literature. So many persons, man and women, interested in people as well as their doing. They are interested in a real world, world of reality, the world of imagination, the love of form as a form. So, these are the main 4 groups of impulses that create at the end a kind of good literature. Now, next slide, it is about why is literature important? Why we want to study literature? So, Leo Tolstoy said about literature that literature fails if it cannot answer the two fundamental questions. The first one is who we are, and second one is how shall we live. So, works of literature at their best provide a kind of blueprint of human society. From the writings of ancient civilization, from you can say Egypt to China, or to Greek philosophy and poetry, from the epics of Homer to the plays of Shakespeare, from the works of Jane Austen to Charlotte Bronte, right? The works of literature give insight and context to all world societies. In this way, literature is more than just a historical or cultural artifact. It can serve as an introduction to a new world of experience. So, as the same way Leo Tolstoy said about literature, that literature fails if it cannot answer the two fundamental questions, who we are. Who we are, it means as a person, as a human being, who we are, and how shall we live, how to be a good human being. If literature does not teach us, if literature does not teach us how to live, and does not tell our mainly identity as a human being, then this is not a literature, it is something else. In a true sense, if any literature just give the answers of these two questions, who we are and how shall we live, it is called literature in real sense. In the next slide and our last slide, we are going to discuss what should we study, why should we study literature? Why we have to study literature as a subject? Why we have to read literature? What are the reasons that we have to study literature, right? So, mainly literature is the reflection of a social and political life of the age. Literature introduces ourselves to us, right? Next, literature is the expression of life in words of truth and beauty. Mainly, literature is a means of communication. Literature shows the reality of life. Literature teaches us humanity and makes us human. Literature provides us not only pleasure and enjoyment, but also it gives you a factual information of a particular age. What does it mean? Literature introduces ourselves to us. When we study literature, we come to know our mistakes in life and we can make amendment accordingly. Now, literature is a means of communication. How it is a means of communication? In which way you can say literature is a means of communication? It communicates through characters, through stories, through essays. So, literature is a means of communication. When it mainly communicates through character, stories, essays, poetry and fiction. Literature is the expression of life in words of truth and beauty. It is a written record of man's spirit, of his thought. It is what? It is a record of thought, emotions aspirations. It is the history and the only history of the mainly history of human soul. Literature shows the reality of life. It is beautiful or bitter. It shows the everyday problems and chaos of life very truthfully. It also influences masses with the intellectual content. I give you one example of it. There is one novel, A Tale of Two Cities. It is written by Charles Dickens. Tale of Two Cities. It is written by Charles Dickens, shows the situation of a French Revolution when the streets were colored red. So, color red, it shows French Revolution in his work. Oliver Twist, a novel, shows how poor children are compelled to do work at younger age. And at the end, literature teaches us humanity and makes us human. So, these are the reason, like why should we study literature? So, these are the reason, like literature is mainly the reflection of a social and political life of the age. Mainly literature introduces ourselves to us, right? We can identify who we are and the way we have to live as a good human being. Literature is a means of communication. It communicates through characters, stories, essays. Literature is the expression of life in words of truth and beauty. And mainly, it represents a human soul. Literature shows the reality of life in A Tale of Cities. There is one color, red. The red color, it shows the French Revolution during that period. Literature teaches us humanity, how we have to live a good and happy life as a human being and makes us human. So, these are the predominant reasons like that we have to study literature. Now, at conclusion, I can say that what exactly literature is. So, literature most commonly refers to the works of creative imagination, including poetry, drama, fiction, as well as non-fiction, and in some instances, you can include a general thing. Simply put, literature represents the culture and tradition of a language. The concept is difficult to precisely define, though may have tried. It is clear that the accepted definition of literature is constantly changing and evolving. What we consider to be literature can vary from one person to other person, from one generation to other generation. For instance, I just give you one example. Herman Melville's one work, Moby Dick, was considered a failure by contemporary reviewers. However, it has since been recognized as a masterpiece and is frequently cited as one of the best works of Western literature for its thematic complexity and mainly the use of symbolism. By reading Moby Dick, in the present day, we can gain a fuller understanding of a literary tradition in Herman Melville's time. When an author writes about something in literature, he uses his imagination. He expresses his thoughts on which he is writing about. He uses the medium of writing to propagate his thought into the society. So, at the end, we come to know that literature is any written material in specific language representing mainly it should have a sublime value, take the readers from real world to the world of imagination. It provides aesthetic pleasure to the readers. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.